We are 3 months away from the presidential election in the United States. We will take a look at Trump's and Biden's chances. Hello, I'm Aaron Maté, and this is The Heat. On November 3rd, millions of Americans will choose to either re-elect President Donald Trump or elevate former Vice President Joe Biden. For now, the polls suggest a victory for Joe Biden. Trump has been criticized for his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, the resulting economic downturn, and social unrest in the country. To talk more about the race for the White House, let's go right there now and talk to CGTN's White House correspondent, Nathan King. Nathan, the polls are not favorable for President Trump at this stage, and his campaign has made some changes recently. But what's the mood there in the Trump campaign?
I mean, one of determination, but understanding that they have an uphill climb. You know, the US president is not a quitter, is he? I mean, he really goes out and sort of fights tooth and nail for everything, and you're going to see it in this race. Yeah, they did meet a couple of campaign changes. Brad Pascal is now moving just to digital, and Bill Stepien, the deputy, taking control. Now, the reason for that, the digital worked very well last time, and also Bill Stepien used to work for Chris Christie in New Jersey, and he likes a political fight. So they are making changes, but the problem is COVID. You know, COVID has destroyed basically the game plan. You know, the US president generates huge amounts of enthusiasm from big crowds. We saw in Tulsa it didn't work. New Hampshire got called off. The smaller events he's done here at the White House, of course, you know, his presidency. So he can't really political, although, let's face it, it has been stretched at times. So it's really, the Democrats are having problems, Donald Trump's having even bigger problems. It's essentially COVID. And there's also just this feeling at the moment that you don't quite know if you can depend on your base. For example, COVID could be still hitting hard in September. Older people may not be able to vote. He's also questioning, you know, mail-in voting, although a lot of studies suggest that that actually may help his base. But he is starting to question potentially the result. Now, I'm not putting anything on this, but this is what he said, for example, just an hour ago.
The mail-in ballots, if you look at just some of the small places, the small races, a congressional race in New York, should be very easy. They have no clue. This was about 6 weeks ago, and they have no clue what's going on. They've lost ballots. There's fraudulent ballots. How are you going to do that for an entire nation?
Now, a lot of states have mail-in voting already. I think 38 have some form or another. But this sort of question mark over mail-in voting, especially if it was a tight election coming down to one state like Nevada, for example, that he mentioned, could make a difference. But however, the polls are telling a very different story at the moment. I mean, the president and Joe Biden are tied in Florida. Biden's even making a run for it in Texas. North Carolina looks dangerous. And the three states that essentially won the US presidential election by less than 80,000 votes, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, look firmly blue at the moment. But as you know, 90 days is a long time in a campaign. Look where we were in 2016.
It certainly is, Nathan. Well, let's talk about the Democrats right now. Joe Biden, the presumptive candidate, he still hasn't announced his pick for vice president. Why is that so important now?
Well, it's important for two reasons. You know, you have to have a full ticket for everyone to take you completely seriously. You know, it took a while for the US president to pick Mike Pence. You know, so that's the other thing. The other thing is that Joe Biden will be 78 years old when he enters the White House. He will be the oldest incumbent. And so, you know, that old phrase, heartbeat away from the presidency, very important. The other thing also is that he says it's going to be a woman. And it may be a woman of colour, although he hasn't said that outright, although he's said so about a Supreme Court nomination. Let me just list you off. There's 11 women, by the way, in contention that we know of. Karen Bass is the new sort of name on everyone's lips. She has come to prominence because of her leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus, especially after the George Floyd killing. There's also, of course, Kamala Harris, who ran as presidential candidate. We have Susan Rice, who was national security on the National Security Council for a while. She's also served as UN ambassador, extremely experienced, but no electoral experience. Elizabeth Warren, There are lots and lots. Tammy Duckworth, the senator, could be the first Asian in terms of it. There are lots and lots and lots. The governor of Michigan, I could keep on going on. So there's a lot to pick from. And there's also, for Joe Biden, doesn't want to repeat what happened with Hillary Clinton in 2016, which is if you pick someone, are you uniting the party? You remember the Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton thing? Well, you've got to pick someone that potentially makes everyone happy. And in the Democratic Party, as with the Republican Party, that's not always easy.
Thanks, Nathan. That's CGTN's Nathan King talking to us from the White House. Well, to talk about all of that, let's bring in our panel. Mary C. Curtis is a columnist for the political publication Roll Call. She joins us from Charlotte, North Carolina. On the other side of the state line, from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, Eric Bolling is a political commentator and host of the program America This Week. Aaron Maté, host of Pushback with Aaron Maté on the Grayzone, joins us from New York City. Also with us, Democratic strategist Joel Rubin from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Welcome to all of you. And Joel, let me start with you. As Nathan just told us, we're only 3 months away from the election, and Joe Biden has yet to announce his vice presidential pick. It's a key decision for those reasons that Nathan just told us. We were supposed to hear about the pick this week, but it's put off until next week. Is there a problem in the camp choosing someone?
Well, Anand, you're right about 3 months out and how we are close to the deadline for our vice president, but really there's no specific deadline that must be met. We've seen vice presidential candidates picked right at the convention in the past for Democrats as well as for Republicans, and we want to make sure that that we get it right. And I think that Joe Biden, he understands the importance of a good vice president. He was one for 8 years, and the American people need to have confidence in the ticket, and they're going to look at this ticket and see it as a strong one because he has so many strong candidates that he's looking at right now. But it is going to be a contrast, and that's the key thing to take away from this is the package that Joe Biden has with his vice president and the contrast it provides and the choice that it provides for Americans. That's going to be the real key. As far as the delay here or there, if it is even really a delay, that's not much of a concern.
Joel, when you say contrast, is that the same as a unifying candidate?
Yeah, I think that for Democrats, there are two parts to this. First and foremost, it's a candidate who is going to strengthen the ticket, that's going to be someone who's seen not only as a value add electorally, but also someone who can govern and who can be a strong vice president. But also it does set up a contrast. The contrasts are clear between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I think Joe Biden had a track record of success as a vice president. Donald Trump has had a track record of failure. And across the board, we're seeing Americans voting in the polls, at least, pointing out their strong confidence in Joe Biden as the candidate. So the vice president is going to be part of that package and demonstrating a clear difference. Vice President Pence as well, he's going to really have to answer for a lot of the failures of this administration. And the vice president will be a person that will take that on in the debate.
Aaron Maté, how important will the vice presidential pick be in terms of the campaign's ideological outlook? In many instances, Joe Biden is seen as a centrist, if not a conservative. So how important are we going to be looking at that vice presidential pick to sort of shift to the left a little bit?
It's a good question. You would think that Trump's horrendous handling of the pandemic and the continued contempt that Republicans are showing towards workers by letting the benefits expire, Trump not coming up with a health plan, even though he's long promised to. You'd think all this would be enough to defeat him, but the problem that I think Joe Biden faces is that there are a lot of progressives in the Democratic Party, people who supported Bernie Sanders, who feel scorned, who feel as if Bernie was cheated out in 2016, and that this time, once again, there was an attempt among centrist Democrats like Biden to collude against Bernie and keep him out, and to reject so many of his signature policies that are popular with so many Americans, like Medicare for All. We just saw this with the DNC platform during the negotiations for that. Bernie supporters tried to put through Medicare for All, but they were told to withdraw that. There was no time to even discuss it. So, look, you'd think that Trump's horrendous record would be enough, but there is a lot of bitter feelings amongst progressive Democrats, amongst some, and a feeling that, that Biden is not that much of an alternative.
So, Aaron, would the vice presidential pick have to have some attraction for those progressives that you talk about?
You'd think that for Biden, it'd be a smart move just to make sure that he has all the progressives in his column to pick someone like, say, Nina Turner or Barbara Lee from the progressive wing. But, you know, Biden's wing of the party doesn't have a record of doing that. I mean, we all remember 2016. Hillary could have tried to unite the party after a very bitter primary, and she chose Tim Kaine, you know, who was probably the blandest pick possible. So we'll see. I mean, personally, I think it'd be wise for Biden to try to reach out to progressives just to make sure. But, you know, at the same time, Biden won the primary, and he might not feel as if he needs the progressives because he thinks perhaps that fear of another Trump term is enough to get people to the polls.
Mary, Joe Biden has said that he will pick a woman for vice president, and there are many in the party as well as many outside the party who are saying that he should pick a woman of color. How important is that for the party and for his chances of election?
Well, many people are saying it is important. Now, Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, who many say really Joe Biden owes him a lot because he endorsed him before that primary that helped him on his way to being the presumptive nominee. And he has said that it would be good, but it wouldn't be essential, that it would be a matter of vetting and polling, and then who the president, vice president would feel simpatico with. But then the Reverend William Barber, the civil rights activist, and others have said it should be an African-American woman because, of course, they are the party, the Democratic Party's most loyal voters, and many feel that they have been overlooked or more taken for granted. And there are so many women of color to pick from. And it's not just a sense of people coming out to vote against Donald Trump. Many feel that they need someone on the ticket, the Democrats, so they'll be enthusiastic about coming out to vote for Joe Biden, and that a woman of color would actually bring the voters out. As your previous guests have said, there are different constituencies. The progressives and young people who haven't been as enthusiastic for Biden, and people of color. They want to see those Obama numbers come up. Now, he has quite a few people who are qualified, who have been named, and there are some women of color there. And I do say, just from talking with people and doing the reporting, there would be some disappointment among some folks in the party if he does not pick a woman of color.
Eric, you are the Republican, the conservative, looking in on this discussion, this debate that's taking place in the Democrat Party on who becomes the vice presidential pick. And here's another argument that I've been hearing, that if Biden picks a woman of color, could that discourage many people from voting for him? Because in this particular instance, for all those reasons that Nathan told us a few minutes ago, the vice president is going to be really a heartbeat away from the presidency, and that's going to put people off. People who say, listen, we're not yet ready for a woman of color to be president.
Well, I think that line is kind of nonsense, Anand. I'd like to also point out that Nathan had said he would be 78 years old as an incumbent. Biden would be 78 years old entering the White House. That is a problem. You need to look at who Biden picks as the potential president going forward. This country's not afraid to elect an African-American. We had the first African-American, Barack Obama. There's no pushback to that whatsoever. It would have been Hillary Clinton, except she was a horrible candidate. Unfortunately for the Democrats, they picked probably the worst choice they could have picked to go up against Donald Trump. He's old. He's had racist comments in the past. He's on record co-sponsoring the 1994 crime bill that if you ask any politically active African-American, including whoever's, or Democrat for that matter, you'll know that the 1994 crime bill is seen as one of the most egregious acts against African-Americans in American history. So Biden's one of the co-sponsors of that. I do believe he has to pick an African-American woman as a vice president to even have a chance, and there's only one African-American woman that will give Joe Biden a chance to win the presidency in 2020. Her name is Michelle Obama, and she's not on that list.
Joel, what do you make of what Eric just said about Biden's record, especially his support for? In fact, he tells us very proudly that he wrote that crime bill.
Yeah, well, look, that was litigated in the primaries, and I think it was answered. And I worked for Bernie Sanders in the primaries, and I know that as a progressive, we were fighting every day to try to create distinctions. But the electorate, they made their choice. And what was good, though, about the coming together of the Bernie Sanders team and the Biden team is that with a unity commission, essentially working groups on core areas of policy, there was a lot of agreement on what the platform should include. It's not perfect for everyone, but that's how democracy works, and that's how the Democratic Party works. We're a big tent, and it's the most progressive platform that we've had in our history. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and we're going to look at Donald Trump. And don't talk about the record on criminal justice. Donald Trump, he can't even reject the Confederate flag, let alone be able to get on the stage with Joe Biden and talk about
Donald
criminal
Trump
justice
is the first
reform.
president, including
Donald
Trump is the
has
first president, including
equivocated
the
on
black
racism
African
every
One moment, Eric, I'll
president
get you.
who got criminal justice reform bills passed, not Barack Obama, certainly nothing to do with Bernie Sanders.
Donald Trump literally equivocates whenever he's asked about racial justice issues in this country, including anti-Semitism after Charlottesville, where he called both sides.
Look what he's done, Joel. Look what he's done. He passed the First Step Act. That's the first criminal justice reform in American history by a president.
He's sending troops into cities unrequested to tamp down on lawful protests in the streets. Americans don't like that, and Democrats across the board are
No one's tamping down on lawful protests. No one's tamping down on lawful protests. There's a difference between lawful protests, peaceful, constitutionally protected, and rioting and looting and destroying property.
All right, just
that's what they're tamping
one
down.
Moment, one moment. Mary wants to say something. Go ahead, Mary.
I was just saying that if you look, though, at his ads and his latest appeals, I'm talking about the president, to fear of those people coming into your suburbs, and he's talking about the suburbs as if it's 1950s when you African Americans couldn't live in this. I actually, in Charlotte, North Carolina, live in an area that had restricted covenants in the deeds that I would not have been able to live in, and so that definitely, he looks like his campaign is about fear. And also, you just had the funeral of John Lewis. And you had 3 former presidents speak there, and Jimmy Carter, of course, sent his sentiments. And Donald Trump didn't even lower the flag for all of one day. And he was only on record of saying terrible things about John Lewis. And so I think when you look at his record on race, as the other guests had pointed out, it is not a good one.
All right, let me go to Aaron Maté. Aaron, elections are about building coalitions and getting the votes. I want to talk about one of the components of the coalition that Joe Biden has to build, and the one that you talked about, which is progressives. Joe Biden has not embraced much of the progressive agenda. If we take things like Medicare for all, as you pointed out a moment ago, he's not in favor of that. If you take things like police reform, he's not in favor of doing away with qualified immunity or in favor of major criminal justice reform. He hasn't said much about immigration at all. Is there a risk here that young people, young progressives especially, could just sit this one out and not go and vote, and that would give the advantage to Donald Trump?
This is what I'm worried about. In 2016, Trump portrayed himself as being anti-establishment, which I think turned out to be a complete con. But the problem is the alternative was Hillary Clinton, who was emblematic of the establishment and all of its failed policies, from neoliberalism that took away workers' livelihoods and took away vital industries from the heartland, to failed regime change and disastrous regime change wars abroad, such as Iraq and Libya. In 2020, Democrats have elected someone with a very similar record, Joe Biden. And I'm worried that it will be, unfortunately, not enough to bring young people and progressives to the polls, because they'll look at Joe Biden and they'll think, what's there to vote for here? I mean, my own personal view is that I have nothing positive to say about Joe Biden and his record, but I think Trump has been such a disaster. I mean, just on the pandemic alone. I mean, just this week, you had Steve Mnuchin saying that Republicans don't want to extend the federal unemployment benefits because that will create a disincentive for people to go back to work. I mean, right now, people would love to go back to work, but the problem is they can't because there are no jobs. We've lost, millions of jobs. People have lost health care. People need help. So even from a short-term point of view, you think it would make sense for Republicans to try to reach people and help people out during this crisis, help the economy too by giving people some money in their pocket. But Republicans and Trump are so devoted to serving corporations, more so than even Joe Biden, which is saying a lot, that they're willing, I think, to undermine their own electoral prospects.
Joel, the Biden campaign strategy up to now has been, hey, look, vote for me because I'm not Donald Trump. He's been running a very low-key campaign, no major speeches, no major network interviews. In fact, he turned down an interview with Chris Wallace of Fox News. I mean, is that enough for him?
Well, I don't think it's that simple. Certainly, that is a very appealing argument to make, but we also have a positive platform. And in 2018, for example, Democrats ran on, for example, health care and the idea that we didn't want to take away Americans' health care. Now we're witnessing the horrible effects of the Trump healthcare vision, which is to just allow Americans to die and not give them any healthcare replacement. That's not where Joe Biden is. There is a strong program available. And I do think that enthusiasm amongst the youth is always a difficult issue to nail. And I want to mention that because with the Sanders campaign, we also tried to get youth turnout, and it was hard to get youth turnout. And in many ways, it didn't come out enough in numbers for the primary. So what's going to mobilize the youth? Well, dealing with climate change. Joe Biden has the best climate change plan ever on record for a presidential nominee by far. And he's been endorsed by many climate activists. What else matters? Getting the economy stabilized, dealing with coronavirus. As my colleague has said, the economy, the idea that we have such a heartless response to people who are unemployed, 51 million lost jobs, and this government can't even find $600 a week to keep people from defaulting and getting kicked out of their housing, and there's no healthcare option. There's many different options that are out there, and Joe Biden is running on those. And I do think that people are going to want to actually have a positive change out of this nightmare that we're living in.
Right, Eric, isn't it common sense that would tell us that at a time of elections, a national presidential election like the one we're coming up on, one should be handing out money rather than saying, hey, there's no money for you?
What, $6 or $7 trillion wasn't enough? I'm not saying we shouldn't go forward, and I think the Republicans, I think Steve Mnuchin and Chief of Staff Meadows are both trying to get a deal with the Democrats. I firmly believe there will be a lot more money handed out, but $7 trillion already. Let's not say there's no money and Trump's not handing out money. They are handing out money. Your problem with the Democrats and with Joe Biden isn't anything other than what Joel accidentally stepped on. He was a Bernie supporter, a Bernie bro, work with Bernie. How are you going to get a young 20, 25-year-old diverse person, Democrat, to vote for a 75-year-old man who's been in politics for 50 years? That's the only two choices you had. You had Bernie and you had Biden, both septuagenarians who've been around forever. They're nothing new. There's nothing exciting about them. The VP pick has to be exciting. Biden's not exciting. Bernie wasn't exciting. Unfortunately, what you're left with, you're left with young people who you need to win to beat Trump, the incumbent. You have to get them. You have to energize them. There's nothing to energize them on. What? AOC's green agenda, which would basically bankrupt the United States and the rest of the world. That ain't going to happen either.
Well, I have to say, since I was pointed out,
yeah, go ahead.
No mistake in there. The fact is that Biden won the primaries going away, and we had an exciting candidate who I deeply admire, and I was proud to be part of that effort. We didn't get the youth vote out like we had hoped, and it's always hard to get the youth vote out, and it's going to take a lot more than even just pure policies. It's a lot about engagement as well, and the Biden campaign has been engaging quite a bit. There's very extensive outreach, but in the pandemic,
his basement, Joel, he can't even half the time he can't even remember where he is. I mean, they're keeping him in his basement. The common wisdom is that they're keeping him there.
I'm sorry that we have a candidate who actually believes in science.
I mean, what? Everyone should stay in their homes.
Let's be clear here.
You have a candidate that will not get out and meet the people.
For 6 months.
Okay.
We have a president who has been misleading Americans. We have the worst pandemic response on the planet.
Yep.
We have a quarter of the deaths for 4% of the population. We have no end in sight. It's getting worse. July was our worst month ever. And we have a president saying, take Clorox to fix yourself. We, on the other hand, have Joe Biden, who actually, when he was in office, dealt with the Ebola outbreak. Do you remember when people were freaking out about that? He actually led the response.
That was when Joe was cogent
and they stopped it in its tracks.
not the state he's in right now.
All right, let me.
If you guys are honest with yourself, you'll admit that man is definitely
just false.
All right, let me.
I'm not going to let you get that out.
Okay, let me bring Mary into the conversation. Mary, I mean, what are your thoughts on what Eric had to say? That Joe Biden doesn't really represent someone who's really exciting and someone who brings something that could win this election very easily and brings a lot of people out to vote.
Well, I do think, as everyone has said, COVID is the issue, and we do have more than 150,000 people who have died. And we see black and brown Americans and essential workers being disproportionately affected. And Joe Biden, I was looking at his plan, and he does have a plan. He was involved with the pandemic responses before, and he has a plan to bolster the economy and small businesses. As far as other folks coming, I do think the VP pick will matter, but also you see that President Obama has come out and he will be campaigning for him, and he is the most popular Democrat out there right now. When you get him, you get Michelle Obama, and folks who are also looking to make sure that we have fair elections. I think that's going to be a big thing as well. You see Donald Trump already putting out ads in states that he won the last time and throwing doubt on the result of the election. So I believe that shows he is a bit worried.
Aaron, I've got a few minutes left, and I want to bring this last point in, and that is the president last week floated the idea of delaying the election. In fact, there was a response to that. His White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, talked about it on a United States television network over the weekend. Let's listen to what Meadows said about that.
All of this that we're talking about comes down to one thing: universal mail-in ballots. That is not a good idea for the country. He has not looked at delaying any election. What we will do is, if we try to transform this and start mailing in ballots all across the country, all 50 states, what we will see is a delay because they're just not equipped to handle it.
Aaron, could we have a situation where one side, the losing side, refuses to accept the outcome of the election?
You know, there's all kinds of speculation about that. The fact that Trump sent one tweet about delaying the election doesn't really bother me as it does other progressives and liberals. I think Democrats would be in a lot stronger position, actually, if they had paid more attention to fighting Trump's policies than trying to litigate his tweets, which are just done to provoke people.
That's a distraction.
And look, we do have a problem in this country where, look, since 2016, Democrats had a hard time accepting that Trump won. Yeah. That's why they latched onto this entire Russia craze, which naturally collapsed. So, I'm not actually worried about Trump holding on to power. I don't see how he would do it. I think all that is actually distracting from the real issues and the real problems with Trump's presidency.
And I'm afraid that we're going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.